Would you like to learn how to improve your clinical observation time so that you can get your therapist treating like you much faster, to really shorten that learning curve, to get better outcomes for your clients, to have happier, less burnt out team members that stay in your business longer, and to have less stress for yourself? Then stick around, because I think this is going to be one of the most important videos that we have made to date. Before we go any further though, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. We produce one video every week where we try and add as much value as possible. And if you do have any ideas for things you'd like to hear about from us, please just chuck it in the comments below. I respond to all of them personally myself. Now, let's jump into it. What we're going to be looking at today are asking specific questions, and in particular, how can I use this? Why must I use this? And when will I use this? And there's going to be a theme throughout where we're looking at these and we're using these questions in our clinical observation to make sure that we're getting the most out of it. Now, typically what happens, and this is the structure that I used to have when I used to get our younger therapists to come in and observe us clinically, is I'd say, come in, sit in the corner, watch what we do, sometimes take notes, whatever it may be. You can ask questions throughout. And what happened was, like this every time, the young therapist, and I did this myself when I was a young therapist too, they came in the room, they sat in the room, and they were just happy to be there. They were just happy to be watching, and they picked up on some things. But what do people pick up on? They pick up on things that fit their own bias. So that typically they're going to pick up on things that they're already pretty good at, and they're not going to pick up as much on the things that don't fit their own bias or the things that are blind spots for them. Now, that's really interesting, because often when we get someone in to do clinical supervision with us, it's because we want to show them the things that they don't do well, and we want to show them how we can do them and how we effectively use them in order to manage a client. But all they're seeing are the things that they do well, right? It's like you see what you're looking for. It's like if you buy a white Tesla, suddenly you're going to see white Teslas everywhere now because you're looking for them, because you're going to notice them. Right? So I hope you can see this. So what we need to do is we actually need to use that reticular activating system, and we actually need to get them focusing on a few key things to help essentially take them out of being in the blind spot over here and put them in their vision, not just their peripheral vision. We want them directly in front of them. And this is a strategy from a guy called Jim Kwik, who's known as the memory guy. And if you're watching this on YouTube, it's very likely that you've seen his ads. He teaches people speed reading, so how to read faster, how to take in more when you're reading, and how to learn faster and remember more. Really interesting guy. And we're going to use some of his principles here. So the first key principle that he says, before you go into a learning moment, for him, he might talk about a book, a course, whatever it may be, is write down 3 key questions that you want to answer in that session. So if we relate this back to what we're doing here, what we want to do is, before we go in for this clinical observation, we want to write down what are the 3 key things, or 2, or even just 1 key thing that we want them to answer. And so you might ask a question about what are the subtle things that the therapist does to build rapport in the first 5 minutes. You might ask a question around, how is the management plan delivered? You might ask a question about what kind of language is used when talking to the parent versus the child. What's the tone of voice? You can pick any of these things, be as specific as possible, but ask open-ended questions, not yes/no questions, open-ended questions, and give them, maybe just start with 1 or 2 and get them to take notes throughout. Because what your brain likes to do is your brain likes to close a loop. So if we open a loop by asking a question, Jim says that your brain is going to need to close that loop in order for it to feel satisfied. It's kind of like when you start watching a new series, you start binge watching that series, and the reason you binge watch that is because you need to know what happens at the end. Gosh, it's like when everyone watched Game of Thrones and then you had to watch all 7 or 8 seasons at once, basically. I went through that myself. And it's because you needed to know what happened at the end. And it's also why my girlfriend, when she watches a movie, about halfway through, she Wikipedias what happens at the end because she really wants to know already. Our brain really likes to close loops. So what we want to do is we want to take advantage of that and actually get them to close that loop by looking for that specific information, because you'll find what you're looking for. And so we need to be really clear in how we're directing them using questions that they have to answer and they have to take these notes on. Okay, so that's the first part, and that's absolutely key. And so what you could do as an action from this is actually go, all right, well, if I want to be able to do this on the fly or systemize it, what are all the questions? If you break your consult down into, it could be before the person even comes in, when you go and meet them in the reception area, the welcome area, it could be the first 5 minutes of the consult. It could be the subjective, the objective, the treatment, and then the plan at the end. You could break it down to all of those and go, what are the key things that I would like them to answer here? What are the key blind spots this person may have? Okay, so we've got a whole list of that broken down into different areas of the consult. So let's say Jimmy comes in and he's gone through, he's answered a couple of those questions. What next? How do we actually really make this stick? Because it's not just this. This is half of it. The second half is where we pull up these questions. So the first part was where we were asking, oh, can't do that there, asking specific questions. The second part is actually getting them to answer these 3 questions. Now, again, from Jim Kwik, the memory guy, he said, if you can answer these 3 questions after that specific learning moment, it's going to stick in your mind, because now you're not just looking for the information, you're looking for ways to use this information. Okay, so we're actually creating 3 more open loops here that we then want to close. So the first one is, how can I use this? So let's use the example here of giving someone a management plan or a really detailed plan at the end of the session. Now, this is something that I find that a lot of young therapists can struggle with. The timing of that, how can I fit that in? The timing, the delivery of that, maybe the feeling of awkwardness, there's a little bit of silence while I'm writing this up, and then the language used in it, the delivery. So let's say that the specific thing that I wanted them to pick out was the language that was used and the time that I took to create that plan. Okay, so I've asked them to pick this up. So Jimmy's come in, he's watched this, and he's noticed that all of the language is very easy to understand. It's non-threatening language. It's used, like it's all done in the patient's own words, basically, how they would speak it. And we spent 10 minutes at the end going through that and actually getting their feedback and making sure that this plan fits into their life at the same time as making sure that we're both going to stay accountable to that. So there's a few key things in there. How can I use this? So what we would get him to write down is, well, how can I use this? Well, straight away, I want to make sure that I'm blocking off 10 minutes at the end of my initial appointment so that I can go through this plan with the person. I want to make sure that I'm writing in their language. It's really, really important. And I want to make sure that this plan fits into their life. And if it isn't, we actually need to come back to that plan and change it up. And we want to keep it simple. We don't want to put too much stuff in there so that no one does it. Okay, so at a very broad level, that could be one thing that we look at. Now, the next thing is, why must I use this? So we've done, how can I use this? Now it's, why must I use this? All right, so now we want to create a list of why it's really important that we must do each of the points labeled above. So why must we block off that time at the end to create the plan? Well, it's really important because if we don't have a plan, well, then people don't know where we're going. If people don't know where they're going, then they're going to lose faith and confidence in us. So they're not going to have confidence that we're the right therapist to go to. If it's not in their language, they're not going to really understand it. If they don't understand it, how can we expect them to be an active participant in their healthcare? How can we expect them to trust us if we write something that they don't understand? So we go through, and there will be plenty of these. There'll be so many. You write down, why must I use this for each of those points above? And the next one is, when will I use this? Really specifically, when will I use this? And this might be obvious, right? We're going to use it in all of our initial consults. But we might say, well, in the initial consult, we use it at the 50-minute mark. If it's an hour initial, we want 10 minutes, or the 45-minute mark. So we're leaving 10 to 15 minutes at the end. So actually going, when will I use this? But there might be other times that it also pops up that it could be used. It might be that, all right, well, once someone's out of, in my example, acute pain, we might actually do another management plan, because we might have to create another plan going forwards. Or once someone achieves their goal, their functional goal, we may need to set another goal. And so we need to sit down and create another plan moving forwards. Because what we don't want is we don't want people just coming session to session to session and feeling like they're not actually getting anywhere. So these are the questions to ask. This is the structure that I think is going to add so much value to your clinical supervision, and getting people up to speed faster, shortening that learning curve, getting them to take those things out of their blind spot, put it right in front of them so they can see it, they can focus on it, and we know what they need to improve. A lot of the time, the disparity in, I believe, why it can take so long for a new grad to get up to speed is the things that they think are important or they need to improve are over here. Whereas the things that we think are important and they need to improve are way, way over here. And so that's the challenge. And so remember, before you go into the consult, flipping around, before you go into the consult, ask specific questions. No more than 3. I normally pick 2, right? Then afterwards, immediately afterwards, we want to reinforce this learning and we want to write these down. How can I use this? Why must I use this? And when will I use this? And I truly believe that if you implement all of these things into your clinical supervision, the time it takes to get your practitioner from where they are now to where you want them to be, it's going to be much shorter. And you're going to get better client outcomes. You're going to have less stress. You're essentially going to speed up the progress of your clinic and make a bigger impact.